So the first question, and you'll have to excuse my pronunciation of your name, Brenda Brun, had a question, and this is primarily for Corky. Would protecting our national Canadian water resource from the pollution of liquid natural gas fracking, corporate sale to water hunters like Nestle, Coca-Cola, and other corporate priorities be better achieved if water use priorities were set at federal rather than provincial levels? Would the policy be less of an interprovincial bargaining tool and more of a natural resource?
It's a hypothetical question, of course, because we don't live in that world, but I would guess that the answer is yes. And the reason is that most international trade agreements allow national governments to make exception for environmental reasons, and provinces don't have that power. Plus, provinces are more, it's easier to buy or threaten a province than a country. And when you allow provinces to set the regulations, then we can engage in what's called the race to the bottom. You know, Alberta has some really nice laws for business, and British Columbia doesn't, and that makes it hard for BC. Whereas if you have a national regulation, everybody has to live up to the same thing. The best example I can use of that is salmon in the Columbia River. Because of the Endangered Species Act, which is a federal act in the United States, Idaho, Washington, Oregon have to work within the Endangered Species Act. We have no such national standard in Canada, ergo we pretty much do whatever we want.
Brenda, anything that answers your question? Yeah, there's one more question on fracking that I think might support it. And this is for Andy. And the question, there was a number of questions, but Andy, the question was a concern about the impact of fracking on our water supply. No, Andy.
Okay, well, you might be aware.
You may be aware that in Alberta right now there is a fracking leak outside Cold Lake that's been going on now for 4 months. It's impacting the groundwater, and they don't know how they're going to stop it right now. And just last week, Newfoundland pulled back from allowing fracking. Nova Scotia has said no, and PEI is also saying no. So there's a huge concern growing across the country around this. And the thing that surprised me is when I learned about what was going on in North Dakota around fracking of oil, some of those fields, their production drops by 80% after the first year. So why are we doing this if it's running that much risk for so little oil?
Thank you. Antoine, did you want to make a comment on fracking?
Just one of the issues with fracking is the volumes of water that are used, and it's making a huge change in a lot of water sources. So that'd be my concern. It's a lot of water is actually used, in addition to what happens if you disturb an aquifer, and then you've got all potential for contamination, and you've got potential for loss of groundwater and such.
Thank you. The next question comes from Mary Jane Blackmore. And Creston and other cities in the Kootenays face an interesting challenge of physically accessing water as more private landowners block access to our waterways. As an educator and a Kootenay girl who grew up in the rivers, I'm concerned that if kids don't grow up with access to the rivers and lakes, enjoying and respecting the water, how will they learn to be caretakers of water in the future? Allowing private landowners to block access to waterways which belong to all of us and to no one is a crime against humanity. It's open to everyone. Would anyone like to? John, do you want to talk about that? John, come up to the mic. It's way easier to hear. Not that you don't have a booming Texas voice. There's one right there. This one? Sure.
Well, first of all, as everyone knows, we suffer from that malady along Kootenay Lake, where most of the access to the lake is private. However, that being said, no one, even private people, have the right to block off public access. You can go down to Sanka Creek, and someone's put a block across the public way down to the water. Can't do that. That's public access to that water. We weren't that smart years and years ago, apparently, and no one really thought that it would be a good idea to set aside more and more parks along the lake. We are now fighting to get more and more of the land that's left set aside for the public. And as we do that, then we hope that the folks that Ms. Blackmore's talking about will have the opportunity in the future years to go down and recreate on the lake without having to deal with private property owners.
Yeah, John, I think, yeah. It's the point. This is the point.
Okay, the point, and here's the point. So the point is this, that there's a lawsuit involved in the point. There's a lot more at stake there than there was just blocking off public access. That's a court case. So, you know, if you own a piece of private property, can you let me finish? Okay, thanks. If you own a piece of private property and you bought the frontage and you paid for it, then you should have the right to use that. The reality is that at the high water mark, that's not yours. I owned a ranch east of town where the creek ran right through the middle of the ranch. Anybody could come walk that high water mark and fish it and recreate in that. I did not own that. You don't own the shoreline down the lake. Nobody does, whether they're from Alberta, Texas, or Oklahoma. They don't own that shoreline. That's owned by the public. You can boat in there and do anything you want on that shoreline.
Yes, you can.
Everything John said is true in theory. However, the former Premier of British Columbia, in approximately 2002, changed the law to allow what is called accretion of the foreshore. Historically, John's absolutely right, a private property owner could not own lower than the high water mark, right? That's how we all lived. The former Premier and government passed a law saying that if you can get a surveyor to say that vegetation, natural vegetation, has now moved the high water mark farther down, then they can move their property line farther down. I have visited properties on Kootenay Lake where the people planted pine trees at below what used to be the high water mark, and because now we have the Libby Dam and we control the lake, the pine trees survived. Then they pay a surveyor a great deal amount of money. The surveyor goes and says, oh yes, those pine trees are natural, and they now own the foreshore. So in order to prevent, like John's telling the truth, except there is, if you have enough money, this loophole that makes it so you can control what the land between where the water is and what used to be the high water mark. And that is what should be reversed and made illegal, so that we go back to all of us being able to walk the foreshore.
Go ahead, Antoine.
Well, they're both right in part. It works for lakes. You can go walk down to the Goat River today, and there is private land that is being crossed by a river. And the landowner owns the property, under the river, cross the other side. Yes, private land. And that determination was made when the land was surveyed, originally surveyed. The surveyor general would have established the natural boundary, which is not necessarily the high water mark, but the natural boundary for the property. And that's where the stream would have been surveyed at the original survey. That can change, accretion, and so on. You could apply for that. But for streams, yeah, right down here, right here in Creston, people own the river bottom.
Okay. Corky, here's a question for you. And it's from Charlotte Kettner. To Corky Evans, how can we, the common people, help the powers that be assist our water control personnel to put assured controls on our precious water supply? Mr. and Mrs. BC must help. P.S. We have many water supplies and boards that control our valley's water supply for potable water. Is it a good or bad policy?
That's, of course, two questions. The first question is, how can regular folks affect the powers that be to care? A previous speaker made the point that in British Columbia, politics for at least the last quarter century have liked, politicians and political parties have liked to create the us and them argument that economy and environment cannot be brought together, that they are natural enemies, and a political party is pro-environment or pro-economy. And that you can't have a healthy economy and care for water and land and trees and soil at the same time. How can regular people change that? I would say, don't vote for them. Tell them you won't vote for them. We, the regular people, have been forced into this unfair and actually dishonest situation of saying pro-economy or pro-environment. That's got to end. We're in a new millennia. Don't support the people who set up that dialogue. Now, the second question was about potable water, right? Mm-hmm. You want to read that part again?
We have many water supplies and boards that control our valley's water supply for potable water. Is this a good or bad policy?
I tend to think that it was always a good policy. My water system has 2 people on it, and I'm not telling you guys where it is. And I wouldn't want some big board to come and control it. On the other hand, this town is now drinking water that comes from an irrigation district. The pipes were laid by farmers, and so also all through the Okanagan, the little organizations are being subsumed by the bigger organizations. I prefer control and ownership to stay as close to the consumer and the people who do the work as possible. But that will require, as John Kettle says, and Andy, changing regulations to make it so regular people can afford it. If we maintain these ridiculously astronomical regulations that make us all behave like the city of Vancouver, then only a corporation or a government will be able to manage water. I couldn't hear you, and I don't know what that means. Yeah, a corporation, a government, or a foreign power will be the only people that can manage our water. We need the regulations to change to allow us to manage our water. That's what I think. Okay.
Ryan, I'm going to ask you this question. It is not... Andy, do you want to speak? Go ahead.
I wanted to answer the first part of the question. In this region, Columbia Basin Trust has been working to help people learn how to conserve water. One of the subdivisions that I represent decided in 2010 to implement water meters. They cost them $200 to put in, and now everybody on that system, and there's about 25 people on that system, knows how much water they're using. Given the climate change that we think is coming, it's really important for us to begin to learn how to conserve water. Because particularly in August, September, and October, we're going to have very, very low flows. By 2035, the glaciers in most of the western Rockies in the US and Canada will be gone. So we better learn to conserve water. And that's one way. You can encourage local governments to put in water meters. They don't cost a lot, but it gives you a tool to learn what you're using on an average day.
As the guy who had the first water meter installed on his property in Erickson, I agree wholeheartedly. They're a great tool. We're kind of running out of time, but there was one thread that Andy just kind of alluded to that ran through a number of questions, and that was the issue of climate change. And I'll leave this open to all of the panelists. What do you see as the impact of climate change on our water supply, and how are we going to respond to it? Any of you that want to answer it? Yep.
I'm the director for Johnson's Landing. In 2012, we had a landslide that killed 10% of the population, and 40% of the people living in that community were impacted. What you don't know is that in 2013, when they had the floods in Calgary, in Caslo, we had the third highest rainfall since we kept records. And that happened in a 24-hour period. We had 7 creeks blow out this year, and I'm still dealing with the after effects with the support of John, who's chair of the regional district. We've probably spent upwards, between Caslo and Johnson's Landing, close to $2 million dealing with last year. This year, we're approaching another 100,000. That's the impact of climate change. Think about what's going on in the Philippines right now, and figure out a way to cut your fossil fuel use. Because we're driving something. I feel a bit like I'm in an airplane trying to take off from a runway. I've been working for 20 years to get people to deal with climate change, and I'm really scared that we're not going to make it.
Ryan, right? You got one of your slides caught my attention because I did a bit of reading and a bit of research, and one of the slides talks about it shows change over a period of time, and there's something shifted in the mid-50s, and you'll see it on that slide. We were bumbling along quite well until the mid-50s, and then something changed. And the rate of change increased. And I've seen that in historical records, like in stream flow records. I've seen it reconstructions using tree rings. I've seen it in Lake Varve reconstructions of climate. And I think what happened is we reached a threshold in the mid-50s, and we're into a different experiment since the 50s. And it's hard to measure it because we're using the data that we've collected since then to determine what's normal, 30 years of data. So it's a running average of data. And now we're using data that's in the period of change as the average. So that's a bit problematic when you're looking at what the potential is for change in the future. So I strongly believe climate variability, absolutely. It is variable. We're in kind of a weird period. And the predictions are we're going to have more extreme events, like the frequency of extreme events is going to increase. You can see it. The magnitude of extreme events is going to increase. We've experienced it. So we're into the experiment. Now it's a question of, okay, how do we respond to that? And as far as risk and hazards, it's really difficult to move communities. But we have communities that are in vulnerable positions because of where they're located. The best you can do at this point is monitor and try and respond as quickly as possible. Flooding, we've got a fair bit of flood protection in the area, but it was tested last year. We don't build for 1 in 300 year events. Engineer to 1 in 200. And so infrastructure is being stressed, and we need to build in more to take into account the uncertainty. As far as water use availability, final point, what are our options? Well, we can adapt, which means we need to reduce our use, change how we're using the water. There's going to be different periods of the year you'll be able to use water, others you will not. Storage is a very limited option in the mountains. It's not really a viable option.
John, you wanted to? John, and then Corky, and then we'll, Brian? Yeah, sure, why not? Agree with that.
I think particularly people my age recognize we had some denial early on in my 50s, which is about 10 years ago. No, I'm actually older than that, and I'm older than Corky, so mind your manners here. We kind of didn't believe, I didn't believe, frankly, that the climate change was as significant as it is. What really I think will determine how we deal with it is how we deal in our own communities. We need to take more responsibility collectively as a community for what we do here. If you're counting on government for an answer, we're screwed. Because we can't give you the answers that you guys all know if we practice the right things. When people don't get involved, I guarantee you this, if I'd have shut the water off on Arrow Creek tonight, I call it a two-flush syndrome. The moment somebody in this town can't flush their toilet twice in 2 days, they'll be coming to a meeting. This thing should be full tonight. Because if you can't live without water. I got news, I can live without eating for a while. But I can't live without water. So the more people you can get involved, the more discussions you can have. I'm not a proponent of one extreme or the other. I think in order for this to work for all of us, we got to come through the middle. Because if we don't, we're going to have anarchy. And with anarchy, it just doesn't work for any of us. So just stay involved. I mean, you showed up tonight. We showed up tonight. I don't know what they paid you guys, but I'm getting paid pretty well. Not really. And I'm not giving money to the Liberals. Just not going to do it.
The Liberals are giving you a goodie bag, so
yes.
How's that?
Just stay involved, get your neighbors involved, talk about it. And this is our valley. No one is going to do better for us than we will for ourselves. Don't let Nelson tell us what to do. Don't let Cranbrook tell us what to do. We need to work here in our valley and work together.
About a year ago, I was honored to be invited because of I used to log. I logged for a long time. And so I was invited to participate in a year-long study with the Forest District and the logging companies in the West Kootenay to deal with the question of what is climate change and what should we plant, what kind of trees are going to grow in the future, what's going to happen. And I'll run through, at the end of the year, what they thought. Western red cedar will cease to germinate south of Revelstoke. The standard Kootenay mix, jack pine, Douglas fir, will move to the forest types of Lytton or Coeur d'Alene, essentially ponderosa pine and grassland. Forest fire will become the a more natural way of eradicating forests than logging. There'll be the same amount of precipitation over the course of a year, but there won't be any more in July and August. It will tend to happen in spring as rain on snow, which means, of course, landslides and less water soaking into the ground for us to use later. Ergo, logging in your kids' and grandkids' time will not look like our experience. Working on the land will become way more difficult because of the tendency to landslide, and all communities are threatened in West Kootenay by fire. The second part of the question was, what should we do about it? I completely disagree with John, who's essentially, but just because I like disagreeing with John, it sets up a dynamic I quite enjoy. But he's basically saying we have to deal with it in our own community. Leadership is actually important. Once upon a time, it was thought that governments, how politicians behaved, set a tone for all of society. And we are living in a country which is embarrassing in the whole world for the fact that we do not acknowledge climate change. As the speaker to my left explained, we have fired and shut up the scientists who even want to talk about it. Ergo, I think our job is political. If you think there's such a thing as a climate change, go elect somebody willing to admit to it.
Ryan, you get you can close it and follow Corky too.
I'm not going to disagree with anything that anyone said already. I think those are all really excellent points. But I just wanted to add another perspective to it. These guys are right. We're entering a period that scientists are called non-stationarity. It's a big techno-speak jargon word, but it basically means a period of uncertainty. And the data that we have and that we've been operating with and the way we've organized our built environment is no longer relevant given the changes that we're seeing. And so there are big implications there. One of the things that Corky spoke about earlier tonight was the Columbia River Treaty. And so the last point that I was going to raise is that this treaty may be a very big opportunity for us. We have in the treaty downstream responsibilities for water, and I suspect that as water becomes scarcer, as the projections show, that there will be very hungry eyes looking north of the border, and that we need to have the governance structure and the leadership in place to address what could be not just a peaceful treaty in the future, but a much more aggressive approach. That's it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Now, a couple of things. Robin is going to bring you up to date on how we're handling this with the media we have here, and then I'll have a couple of things to say as we conclude. Robin?
First off, that was fantastic. Thank you. I learned a tremendous amount tonight, guys, and the questions, there's so many really, really good questions, more about agricultural practices, about mining practices, resource extraction, development, and I mean, we've got some very, very wonderful questions, and we don't want to leave this on the table and just walk away from this point. Some of you have asked, okay, where to from here? And I want to invite every last one of you, and the panel included, to either come sit on the committee, because we're looking to form a Water Matters Committee. It is a nonpartisan, cross-political. We're going to sit down and we're going to try and figure out what we believe is best for the Kootenay Columbia and develop some policy that we can take to Ottawa. And frankly, I don't care who takes it. Let's just take this to Ottawa and let's do something about it. So you are all invited to either join the committee or please make a submission. A lot of you have given us some really good feedback here. And if you want, or if you would, we'd really appreciate you taking the time, sending us a note, and letting us know what you think is important and what we should be doing at the federal level. I also wanted to note, someone had asked, where can we get the video? Where can we get the information here? If you go to kootenaycolumbia.liberal, that's a singular liberal.ca, that we will be posting the video on there, and we will be compiling as much as we can and coming up with a synopsis. We'll be sending out information on this, but we need committee members and we need people involved in order to do this. So we ask you, please, put your name forward. We don't bite. We're a great group of people. We have a lot of fun. And again, thank you. Just so wonderful to see everybody here, and I really hope we can take it from here. Thank you.
Just in conclusion, should advise you that this was all done with 5 members on a committee. And Catherine, is Catherine still here? Oh, right there. Catherine and Debbie and Dawn at the back, and Robin and Bill were the committee. I chaired the committee as just a chairman for the meetings, and that's what's happened here tonight. We'd like to thank you very much, particularly the committee, and I hope you enjoyed this. The one thing I should apologize to Ryan is that he hasn't got too many of his members here tonight, because when I we decided on the 12th of November for the meeting, and I came down to the rec center, tried to reserve this room, and they said, oh, I think there's a dance class in there. And so I said, well, what about using Rotocrest? She said, oh, there's a very important meeting of Wild site there. So that's where they've been. And so I'm going to invite Ryan to make sure they're aware they can get it online. We really miss them. And so thank you very much for coming. The other thing is the refreshments and the food were provided by Bill at Truscott Farm. So thank him very much. So once again, thank to what I think is an outstanding people up here in the front. And thank you very much for coming. See you again.